If you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, what would you want to say to your loved ones today? If you knew that tomorrow was truly going to be your last day on this earth, is there some word, some encouragement, some kindness, some guidance, some clarity that you'd like to give to those whom you love before you die? I've always been very interested in and moved by the way that St. John shares with us Jesus' greatest concerns just before he dies. I just think it's a really powerful moment. We know what Jesus is about to go through, crucifixion. And in that moment, he has things on his heart that he's concerned about, and he offers this beautiful prayer. And I think it's a prayer that we really should be paying a lot more attention to than we ever seem to have done, because it is at the last moment of his life. My mother, in the final months of her life, kept underscoring this concern she had. In conversations with me and my brother, she'd talk about this thing over and over. Unlike Jesus, she didn't know that she was going to die. But some months before she died, she'd been in a terrible car accident and she'd bled out in the road. Then she'd been in this long surgery and this slow recovery process. So she at least knew that life was more vulnerable than it had ever felt before. And in the midst of that, she was struggling with some things that she talked to each of us about. We didn't know that she talked to each of us until after she died and we were standing around having conversation. I said, well, you know, Mom was saying so-and-so, and my brothers, oh my gosh, she talked to me about those same things more than once. What is this thing that she kept expressing to us over and over? That we not lose our connectedness with one another. She realized that she was the glue that held the family together, and she wanted to make sure that when she was gone, the family would still hold, that we would not lose contact with each other, that we continue to love each other, that we'd nurture the relationship between our children, and that we would spend time together. She wanted to make sure that the family that she had created would continue to have life. Family was always really important to my mother, and I think it's because her father drowned when she was 17 years old. And then her mother, a couple of years later, remarried out of necessity, I think. And it was a difficult family situation. This mixed family didn't go well. And then her mother died when her mother was 58. My mother was just barely 30 and had 3 little children. And she had depended greatly on her mama, and now mama was gone. But she had a lot of cousins and aunts and uncles, and she held tightly to them. She was big on family reunions, on reaching out to family, keeping connected, bringing us together for birthdays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, all these occasions. My father didn't love any of that. And my mother's 3 sons didn't love any of that. But she dragged us all to every single occasion because she wanted that family to stay strong. Now, did Mother just love and adore every person in that family? Were they all just bosom pals? Well, no. You've been to family reunions. It's a mixed bag, right? You know, I mean, there are all kinds of people that get wedged into our families. So no, there was not that. There were some difficult personalities. There was Aunt Fanny Jane. Don't you love that name? Aunt Fanny Jane. And Fanny Jane, she talked all the time, even when she was eating. And the reason she talked when she was eating, because she had to talk all the time. And what she talked about was how bad other people were. Even at the dinner table, she'd talk about people that were bad. Like, look at him wearing that suit today. He looks so stupid. You know, stuff like that. She had that to deal with. Good old Fanny Jane. There was this other relative. She had a nice house. She had 3 bathrooms. We know for a fact that she had running water. But this woman seemed not to understand the concept of bathing. So she was a smelly girl. And my mother did not do well with bad smells. But she hugged that woman and kissed that woman because she was family. And there was this other fellow. He's a nice enough guy, but he had this thing at the dinner table. He had a big glass of iced tea, and he'd take a cube of ice in his mouth, and he'd chew on it, and then he'd spit the pieces back in the glass. And then he'd do that over and over, and my mother just couldn't stand it, you know? But he was family. Utterly uncouth, but family. All these were family, and so they mattered to my mother. She would knock herself out for any one of them if they were in a difficult situation. She would defend them with all of her might if they were criticized by somebody outside of the family, because they were her mother's people. And so they were her people. For good or ill, they were all her people. Because she loved and adored her mother so much, who was no longer on this earth, she was determined that her mother's people would stick together. I think it was not only because my mother needed family, but I think it's because it was her way of honoring her mother and what her mother had created. Jesus, in what we call his high priestly prayer, seems to be hoping that his family might have some of that same level of dedication to one another. This prayer that Jesus offers at the end of his life is called his high priestly prayer because he's sort of playing the role of the high priest of Judaism. He's holding all of his followers, all of humanity before God as he is about to sacrifice himself in love for us. He is praying for our future. In his last moments, when he knows death is coming, what is on his heart and mind is us and our future. He knows he will no longer be physically present to act as the glue to hold his followers together, his family together. So he prays that his people might have a depth of love and faith that allows God's Spirit to be the glue that holds them together. That's what he's praying. That God's Spirit might hold the family strongly together. Why was that so important to Jesus? And why was it so important to John, the writer of this gospel? You know, it wasn't included in the other three gospels. They don't have this prayer. Only in John's gospel. But you remember, John's gospel comes much later than the other three. It's in the 90s, at the end of that century. He was a little boy when he was following Jesus around. That's why he could hang out at the cross with Mary while the others had fled, because he was a child and they were grown men. He had nothing to worry about. Nobody's going to put him on a cross. So he lives longer, and it's late when he writes his gospel. So he's seen a lot more upheaval, turmoil, brokenness in the life of the church than the other three had seen. He, of course, saw what they had seen. He saw Roman rule and how harsh it continued to be and how demeaning. The continuous wars that Rome was in with everybody, Germanic tribes and Gaul and Britain and everyone else, always pulling money from the poor in order to support those wars. You remember the Emperor Augustus was there for a long time and at least brought stability to the empire. But then he died. And you know who came all too soon and stayed too long was Nero. That crazy megalomaniac, that egocentric, hateful soul who just did so many terrible things to religious people, not just Christian people. You remember that Rome burned during that time. The Christians were blamed for it, and they were burned and sacrificed to lions. Jews were treated similarly in many instances. He was just a harsh and hateful person. There were awful things that took place during that time. And then he killed himself, and what happened? Well, you remember there were 4 people who suddenly started popping up claiming that they were the new emperor, and so it was all this infighting and instability. And then you remember in 70 AD what happened when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. From 66 to 70, they were in war with the Jews. Horrible wars, lots of killing. And then they said enough of this, brought in more legions and just wiped them all out. Destroyed Jerusalem, burned down the temple. You remember just 9 years later, there was Vesuvius. You remember that volcano? I mean, this crazy thing that happened, that it completely covered this prominent city called Pompeii. This is scary stuff. And there's infighting. They're fighting among Jews and Christians. And the early church is very divided. Once Gentiles start coming in, there's so much disunity. And the disciples, the followers of Jesus, these faithful people who've been out there teaching his truth, are dying one after another, martyred. And we think we live in tumultuous times, right? Good heavens. You can see why St. John would want to make sure that this prayer is being held up and underscored at such a time. Let's not forget this prayer that we overheard Jesus pray. Do you remember what was at the heart of his prayer? John saying that we all be one. I mean, clearly he was worried that this Christian movement wasn't going to continue beyond the first century. So that's why it was important for John. But why was it important to Jesus? Well, I mean, obviously, Jesus was aware that there would be major challenges for this young church to survive in this broken, destructive world. But there's clearly something deeper going on with Jesus. He says this to God in the prayer. He says, Father, I pray that they might all be one, as you are in me and I am in you, that they also might be in us, and thereby everyone know that you have sent me. So there's this idea that God is 3 in 1, right? That's what we've come to believe, Father, Son, and Spirit, 3 in 1. Prologue of John tells us about the second person of the Trinity. That's what we call this person. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word came and dwelt among us. Right? So we get this clear idea when we read through the Bible that God created for what purpose? Relationship. Creation's a gift, a blessing. Love is being offered in creation. It's all about relationship. God is relational in his very nature. He's Father, Son, and Spirit. In his very nature, he's relational. And he chooses to create other beings that might enjoy that relationship, that might become a part of that life-giving reality with the Father, Son, and Spirit. Not something forced, not something demanded. There's free will, so it can be chosen. But more than anything, he wants that relationship. Do you remember in the Genesis story, there's that quaint business about God walking in the garden with Adam and Eve? It's communicating the relationship, that that's what God wanted, that was the purpose of creation. And then there was the big mess that we made of all that relationship, right? And then God sends Jesus. The second person of the Trinity becomes embodied in this first century man, so that God might do what? So that God might restore us and the whole of humanity, which he already created, to that relationship. That's the goal. That's the goal, this loving relationship. It's the foundation to the whole of Scripture. But here's the problem. If what God is seeking is to restore the whole of humanity to this loving relationship where we are all united as one in God, and he seeks to do that by sending Jesus. And Jesus then inspires and raises up this group of people who believe in him. And then they get empowered by his Spirit for what purpose? So that they might be then God's vehicle for convincing the world that he was alive, present in Jesus. And that what he's seeking is this unity. He's seeking something that is markedly different from the world around us. All this world knows is disunity. Look at us. Go read the history all the way back. What are we about? We're about hatred. We're about war. We're about despising one another, demeaning one another, dominating one another. It hasn't changed a bit, has it? That's who we are. Disunity is who we are. But that's not what God's seeking. He's seeking unity. He's seeking that we all might be one together in the love of God and Jesus. Unity. But how can you believe in this unity? How can you believe that God has done anything at all in this Jesus person when it's not visibly present in the world? When you've seen no success of it, right? It's like too many people have said to me too often in the course of my ministry, people who've chosen not to be a part of the church, who say, what does it matter? I don't see that it makes any difference. What difference does that make? I was in the church for a while. It made no difference. The church is just like the world. The church bickers and hates and demeans and dominates. It's no different. It's just the world all over again. Where do they see the difference in us? I think they rarely do. The Catholics and the Protestants can't even receive the body of Christ together. The Baptists and the rest of Christendom can't agree on baptism. The Orthodox don't think the rest of Christianity even understands the Trinity because all that mess that we've made of the Nicene Creed. The Charismatics think if you don't speak in tongues, you aren't really in the Spirit. The fundamentalists say if you don't believe in every word of the Bible is literally true, then you're going to hell. What a bloody mess we are. What a bloody mess we are. We aren't a bit different than all those political parties out there in the world who care more about their politics than they care about people. When you start putting politics ahead of people, there's no godliness in it. Now, you all know that I am not a happy bedfellow with fundamentalists or charismatics. For the whole of my ministry, those are the two groups that I've most struggled with. But I have to ask myself, do I so hate those things that make us different that I cannot love the people who represent those differences? Is there not something deeper than those differences that keep us united? Is there not at least a common love for God and for Jesus that makes us in some mystical way one, despite the fact that some of us talk with our mouths full and spit ice into our glasses at the dinner table and have a terrible odor about us? I was honored recently to be invited by a young friend to attend his ordination in the Baptist church. And I'm sure I looked odd sitting there in my clerical collar among all those Baptists. And I'm sure I have a different idea of ordination than the clergy of that church. And that the way I prefer to worship and the way I articulate my faith would be different from the way they do. And having me sit among them might have been a bit of a smelly thing for some of them. But beyond all of that, do I not think that my young friend has been consecrated by God for a holy calling? Yes, of course I do. Do I not think that the people of that church are seeking to live faithful lives? Yes, I do. That they're honoring God in their worship? No doubt about it. Am I going to continue to disagree with them over the theology of baptism and ordination, and even with many aspects of biblical interpretation? Yes, I will. Forevermore, I will. But there is nonetheless something deeper than all of that, surely, that binds us together. Do you not think it's a beautiful thing in the eyes of God when he sees Baptists and Catholics and Episcopalians and Anglicans and Presbyterians and Methodists and non-denominational folks come together in love? Is the love we have for Jesus not stronger, higher, better than all the disagreements, however serious those disagreements might be? I'm not saying that the disagreements aren't important, that they don't matter, that we shouldn't continue to have them. We're gonna. But if we're gonna be the church of Jesus in the world, isn't there something bigger than all of that? Think of this. Are you not moved when you see a married couple stay married, even when they go through horrible things in that marriage? Doesn't that perseverance say more about the marriage than the broken realities that threatened it? Are you not moved by a love that sustains in that way? Are you not deeply touched when you see a man who has been raised to be a white racist change his heart because in a difficult moment, the only person who reached out to him was a black man, and God used that to change the heart? What a beautiful thing I was moved deeply by the story I heard a couple of years ago from a young woman who's a lesbian, who lived a rebellious life of alcohol, drugs, and sexual abandonment. Yet she said that the people of the little church she had grown up in were always kind to her. She stopped going to that church when she was a teenager, but she said every time I ran into any of those people from that church out in the community, they smiled, they welcomed me warmly, they said I looked so good when I knew I didn't look good at all, and they said they missed me. And she said years later, when I went through a really bad time, I turned to that church, and she said it was because they had shown that consistent kindness. She said that if they had been hateful and mean and judgmental, I would never have turned to them. But because of the way they lived out their faith, I felt that they cared about my life. My mother sat at table and shared many special meals with people with whom she had significant differences. But they were somehow bound together beyond those differences. Some of you, all of you, know that I was once a part of a downtown church some years ago, and that I left that church to create another church, and that the church I left has some different theological commitments than mine. Yet every time that I or any member of my family has returned to that church for a funeral, a wedding, or any other special occasion, we have been treated with warmth and kindness and respect. And I cannot help but see Christ in that. So my mother sat at table with a lot of people with whom she had significant differences, but she stayed at table with them because they shared the same mama, grandmama, great-grandmother. There was a unity that no difference could overcome. And I must say that that is a rare and beautiful thing. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we saw more of that in God's church?